It is still dark in the Orange Free State, and 350 men are lying in a stream bed called Cornspruit. It is a fold in the open grassland, the kind of crease in the veld you wouldn't notice until you were standing in it, which is precisely the point. The men hunker down with their horses, pressed into the earth on the eastern bank. Cornspruit is a shallow crossing where the road from Tabanchu in the eastern Free State runs down to the water and up the other side towards Bloemfontein. The men have been told not to move, not to shoot. Not a single round, the general said, until I give the word. It is the 31st of March, 1900, 6 months into the Anglo-Boer War. The air over the Free State is cold the way only Highveld dawns are cold, and the light is just beginning to come up grey behind the men's backs, which is exactly how their general wanted it. The rising sun in the enemy's eyes, not theirs. Above the Spruit, in the half-light, a wagon slowly appears. A few black drivers stand beside it with sheep and cattle, and when the hidden burghers question them in whispers, the drivers explain the wagon belongs to one of the hands-uppers, a Boer who has surrendered to the British, and they have been ordered to get it and the livestock down to Bloemfontein and sell the lot to the English. And then the light comes up, and there, 3,000 paces off, close enough to hear, is the whole thing. A British column, guns, carts, more than 100 wagons, 2,000 men and horses, the rearguard of a general called Broadwood falling back from Tabanchu towards the safety of the capital. Down in the Spruit, the general watches them come. He has 350 men against 2,000, and he has decided this is fine. The first cart reaches the drift, a man driving, a woman beside him. They roll down into the streambed and are met with a row of rifles. 2 of the general's men climb up calmly on the cart and sit down next to the driver, one on each side. Keep moving, make a sound, and you're dead. The next cart comes, and the next. And because the carts keep flowing through and up the far bank, nothing looks wrong from behind, and so the soldiers come on, pouring down into the drift in a loose, unbothered crowd. Then, out of the bank, at arm's length, in their faces, comes the cry, hands up. A forest of hands goes up into the cold air. 200 of them disarmed before a shot is fired, before most of them even understand a word has been spoken. 7 field guns taken, 100 wagons, the pride of a British column folded up at dawn by a man in a ditch. And the man in the ditch, the one who chose the ground and set the trap, is right now losing his hasty temper because his own burghers keep stopping to ask, "Where shall I put this rifle, General?" That general is the reason we are here. His name is Christiaan de Wet, and over the next 2 years, the largest empire on earth is going to put tens of thousands of soldiers into this landscape for the single purpose of catching him. They are all going to fail. I've known de Wet's name most of my life without knowing the man, and I guess that may be true for a lot of us here. The names from this war get handed down like heirlooms: Sanna's Post, Speenkop, the camps, and like heirlooms, most of us never really look at them. You can grow up in this country carrying the whole thing around as a feeling instead of a story, that something enormous happened on this ground to people whose names are still on the map and maybe in your family, and that nobody ever quite finished telling you what. The war ended in 1902. In some rooms, it hasn't quite ended yet. I went and read it, the memoir he wrote afterwards, called 3 Years' War. It's plain, unboastful, just a soldier setting things down because he was there. It's a wonderful read. The men who chased him, they couldn't decide whether to despise him or to take their hats off to him. And that morning in the Spruit kept doing to me what it just did to you. 350 men, 7 guns, 500 prisoners, a morning's work against an empire. There's a quote that gets passed around about the kind of fighters the Boers were. Nobody can pin it down. It's been hung on different generals in different decades, the way best lines always are. But it runs roughly like this. A British commander, supposedly speaking in the Second World War, said, "Give me 20 divisions of American soldiers and I'll breach Europe. Give me 15 of Englishmen and I'll march to the gates of Berlin. Give me 2 divisions of those marvelous fighting Boers and I'll wipe Germany off the map." Now, whether a general actually said that, in those words, I can't genuinely tell you. But the fact that it exists, that it circulates, that it feels true enough that people keep repeating it, that tells you something. It tells you what kind of reputation these men left behind. It tells you what an enemy thought of them, which is often the most honest kind of verdict. My obsession with the Boer War all started with this quote. We've already ridden with Jan Smuts and Denise Rates, 2 young men swept up in the guerrilla campaign, crossing impossible distances across a country on fire, doing things that shouldn't have been survivable, and somehow surviving them. But through all the stories, I kept circling back to De Wet, the one figure at the dead center of the whole thing, who kept the war alive long after every scrap of military logic said it should have ended, who made the British Empire look, at various moments, genuinely foolish, and who did it all as a middle-aged farmer from Heilbronn with bright eyes and a briefcase, who never wanted to be a general in the first place. And here's the thing, you don't have to take my word for the admiration, because the enemy's own chronicler couldn't help it either. Arthur Conan Doyle, yes, that Conan Doyle, the Sherlock Holmes man, was in South Africa during the war and wrote what became the definitive British account of it. He watched this happen, and describing De Wet's raids, he writes, quote, "A strange game of hide-and-seek ensued, in which De Wet, who led the Boer raids, was able again and again to strike our line of rails and to get back without serious loss." And then almost against his own will, the energy and skill of the guerrilla chief challenge our admiration, and the score of his successes would be amusing were it not that the points of the game are marked by the lives of British soldiers. End quote. That's a British writer writing for a British audience in the middle of a British war. And he can't help himself. He admires the man. Neither can I, though the more time I spent inside this story, the more complicated that admiration got. Because admiration and cost are not opposites here. They're the same thing, seen from 2 ends. I should be straight with you about what kind of story this is, because the easy version is right there, and it is the wrong one. The easy version is the legend, and the legend is great. The slipperiest soldier of his age, unkillable, untrackable. An empire so obsessed, it ran what the newspapers of the day actually called the Great De Wet Hunt. Columns and blockhouses, and armoured trains, and tens of thousands of men sweeping the country like beaters driving game, closing the net around one man, over and over, and every time finding the veldt empty and a thin trail of hooves heading the wrong way. Tell only that, and I've made an action film. A clever man, a slow empire, a chase. fun, and forgotten by morning. But here's what the story is actually about, and I'm going to say it once and then spend 2 episodes proving it to you. This is a story about a man who could not lose and a country that was losing anyway. That is the tension under everything. What makes the vet impossible to catch, the thing underneath all of it, is that he will not accept defeat. He cannot fathom it. Surrender is simply not a category his mind contains. And for a while, for a glorious, infuriating while, reality bends to fit him. The empire swings its fists and hits open grassland. But all the time he's keeping that fist busy, all the time he's making room, out of his sight, and mostly out of his record, the war is being lost in a different way entirely. Not on the battlefield, on the farms, in the camps, among the people who could not gallop away. For 2 years, the British keep drawing a net tighter and tighter around this one man. And here's the trap I want you to watch for, the one I fell into myself. While you're watching the net, while you're rooting for him to slip it one more time, you stop noticing who's already inside it. The man it's built to catch keeps stepping clean over the edge. The people it was never aimed at can't move at all. So that's the deal. I'll give you the thriller, the ambushes, the escapes, the night rides up bare rock where no horse should go, the moment the entire British army has him surrounded and the gate is standing wide open anyway. But I'm going to keep asking you, at the seams, and for what? And at the end I'll show you a picture, a specific one, and I'll tell you what I make of it and admit what I can't. So let me tell you where he comes from, because to understand why he couldn't lose, you have to understand a hill called Majuba. This is more than a story. If you grew up in South Africa, you know the name in your bones, but stay with me because the why matters more than the fact. Majuba is a flat-topped mountain on the border of Natal, and on the 27th of February 1881, it was the scene of the last battle of a short, almost forgotten war we now call the First Anglo-Boer War. Almost forgotten everywhere except here. The British general of the day had marched a few hundred men up Majuba in the dark and planted them on the summit, certain that holding the high ground meant holding the whole situation, that no farmer would dare come up at him. And the Boers came up. They climbed the mountain under fire, working from rock to rock and cover to cover, shooting as they came, and in something under half an hour, they swept the British off the top of it and sent them tumbling back down the way they'd come. The British commander was killed. The thing was a rout, a humiliation. De Wet was on that mountain. He was a young man on the slopes of Majuba in 1881, and he watched the empire get knocked off the top of the hill by farmers with rifles. And here's the lesson that went into him and into a whole generation of Boers and never came out. The British can be beaten. We have beaten them. And the way you beat them is the way we just did. You don't stand and trade volleys. You use the ground. You use cover. You move. and you make their numbers and their drill count for nothing. After Majuba, the British actually handed the Transvaal back its independence rather than fight on. The farmers shot the empire off a mountain, and the empire said, "Fine, you can have your country." That is the story De Wet carries into manhood. That is the precedent. So when the big war comes in 1899 and people start using the word defeat, De Wet simply does not have the category. To him, it's not pessimism or realism. It's a kind of nonsense, like being told water runs uphill. He has personally seen the alternative. He was there. Which brings us, of course, to the hunt. Because for all his certainty, for all his gifts, the war does not stay won. Majuba was 1881. This is 1899 and 1900, and it's going to turn out to be a very, very different kind of war. One where being impossible to beat in the field and actually winning are two completely separate things. And the gap between them is exactly where the tragedy of this whole story is going to live. But before the empire ever learns his name, De Wet has to give them a reason to. He has to do something that makes the most powerful military on earth stop and turn and points every column it has at one stocky farmer with a briefcase. He is about to, at a place called Sanna's Post. Go back to the drift, but this time stand further off, because the cold open showed only the jaws closing. It did not show how he built the thing, and the building is the masterstroke. It is late March 1900, and as far as the British are concerned, this part of the war is finished. Lord Roberts has just marched 50,000 troops into Bloemfontein, the Free State capital, and raised the Union Jack over it. By every rule the British understand, taking the enemy's capital ends the matter. They are already turning north towards the Transvaal and the close of the whole business by summer. Out in the veld, De Wet has decided to inform them personally that they have misread the situation. He chose his ground for a reason. Sanna's Post is the waterworks, the pumping station on the Modder River that gives the captured capital its drinking water. Take it, and you have your hand around the city's throat. He expects a light guard, a few hundred men. What he does not yet know is that Broadwood's whole column is retiring through exactly this ground, fat with wagons and guns and men who think the danger is past. The trap has two parts. He sends the bulk of his force, 1,150 men with the guns, to the high ground east of the river, with orders to open fire at first light. That is the hammer, and it is meant to be loud and obvious, because a man under bombardment runs the natural way, away from the guns. The natural way is the road to Bloemfontein, and the road runs down into Cornspruit, where De Wet waits with 350 men. That is the anvil, and it is silent. You have seen the two halves meet. The guns open at dawn, the column panics back towards the capital exactly as designed. The carts and then the men pour into the drift, and the burghers rise out of the bank with that flat little phrase, and the forest of hands go up. But here's what the cold open held back. It very nearly comes apart, because 350 men cannot actually finish 2,000, and De Wet knows it. The plan needs those 1,150 reinforcements to cross the river and crush Broadwood against the Spruit, and the river will not allow it. The waterworks dam, the very thing he came to capture, has backed the Modder up so deep that his own men cannot ford it. They try. They ride upstream looking for a crossing, hit an impassable ravine, and have to turn all the way back, losing 3 hours doing it. The trap is sprung, and the far jaw will not close. So hold him there through those 3 hours. He has built the most beautiful ambush of his life, and he is now sitting in a ditch with 350 men, a few hundred prisoners, and 100 captured wagons, in what he calls a state of indescribable confusion. Dead horses, broken carts, his own burghers wandering about asking where to stack the rifles, while at any moment a fresh force could come up from Bloemfontein and turn the day inside out. His own account barely hides the strain, and the man who cannot lose does the only thing left to a man who cannot lose. He holds. He sits in the ground he chose and trusts it, and the ground is so good that across those 3 desperate hours, only 2 of his men are hit. The reinforcements finally find a crossing below the dam and come up hard. Broadwood, who has fought all morning to get clear, breaks at last and runs the final stretch to the railway station, where the building gives his survivors cover, and he turns 2 saved guns back on the Spruit. His column streams away while the burghers fire into it. De Wet watches him go and is, of course, annoyed. Had he commanded a larger force, he writes, he could have taken every man of them. Not relief that the gamble paid, irritation that it did not pay off more. He has just gutted a British column with 1/10 of its numbers, and he is filing a complaint about the ones who got away. The bill, and here the 2 stories almost shake hands. De Wet counts 3 of his men killed and 5 wounded. 3 dead, for what he took, is almost nothing. On the haul itself, the accounts agree closely. 7 field guns, somewhere over 100 wagons, several hundred prisoners. De Wet says 480 taken. Doyle, writing it from the British side, puts the prisoners above 300, and the whole loss, killed and wounded and missing, near 500. Pick the figure you trust, the shape does not change. A column gutted at dawn by a farmer in a streambed for the price of 3 dead men. And the real cost ran past the guns. With the waterworks in Boer hands, Bloemfontein had to fall back on its wells, and that change fed straight into the typhoid already moving through the British camps, which went on to kill more of Roberts's men than Boer bullets ever did. De Wet did not only take 7 guns, he poisoned the water of a captured capital and never had to say so out loud. De Wet writes about Sanna's post in his memoir with the flatness of a man filing a report. He notes that his object was to surprise the garrison and cut off the water supply. He notes the numbers, he moves on. Arthur Conan Doyle calls it the most clever and audacious operation the Boers had yet attempted. He also uses the word luck. But luck is what you call something when you don't understand how it was done. What actually happened at Sanna's post was not luck. It was 350 men in a ditch before dawn, a general who told nobody his plan except the 4 people who needed to know it, and a piece of ground chosen because a wagon disappears for 2 minutes as it crosses it. De Wet had looked at that 2-minute window and built an entire operation around it. The British had looked at the same ground and seen a road. That gap in perception, that difference in what the same piece of country meant to each side, is really what Sanna's post was about. And it is what the next 2 years of this war would keep being about, in different forms, on different ground, until the British finally understood that no amount of men could compensate for not thinking like the man they were trying to catch. For the British Army in the spring of 1900, Sanna's post was a shock and a humiliation. For Christiaan de Wet, it was proof of concept. 4 days later, he did it again. A second British force, 5 companies, surrounded and forced to give up nearby at Redesburg. Around 50 British killed and wounded, more than 500 taken prisoner, and de Wet's own loss, 1 Veldkornet killed and 6 wounded. That is the morning the Empire learns his name. Before Sanna's post, he is one Boer general among several in a war London thinks is winding down. After it, and after Redesburg, and after the run of disasters that follows, the most powerful military on earth begins to grasp that the fall of the capital settled nothing, that there's a man loose in the Free State fighting an entirely different war, and that until they put him in a cage, none of the rest of it is safe. By June, the second capital has fallen too. Roberts has marched into Pretoria, and London is more or less writing the victory editorials. The war is won, the papers agree. What remains is mopping up, a matter of weeks. And the whole of that confidence rests on one thing, which De Wet understands better than the men who depend on it: the railway. An army of 250,000 men in the middle of Southern Africa needs, every single day, the food and the ammunition and the boots and the blankets and the fodder and the mail from home, and all of it comes up one thin iron thread running hundreds of miles north from the coast through the captured capitals. The line is the spine of the British wall. Cut it, and the giant cannot feed itself. And there's a stretch of line De Wet knows the way he knows his own face, because it runs through his own district. 4 miles across the flat, dusty plain from a station called Roodewal lies his own farm, Roodewal. He has farmed this ground and hunted it and governed it. And piled beside the line at Roodewal, waiting for a broken bridge over the Renoster River to be repaired, sits a mountain, a literal mountain of British stores. Ammunition, clothing, food, 2,000 bags of mail. Days after taking the enemy's capital, the enemy has left a fortune lying all but unguarded in Christiaan de Wet's front garden. You can guess how this goes. He warms up with pure theatre. On his way in, his men ring a British convoy at dawn, completely and silently, before anyone is properly awake, and he sends one burgher forward under a white flag with a simple message: you are surrounded. Escape is impossible. Give up and spare the blood. An officer comes out to talk terms, and De Wet's terms are 2 words: unconditional surrender. And rather than test whether he means it, the convoy folds without a shot. 50-odd wagons and a couple hundred men, mostly Highlanders, taken by nerve and a folded note. Then he goes for the mountain. He splits his men 3 ways: one party to hit a station up the line, one under his general Vroneman to take the British camp at the Renoster Bridge, and the third, 80 men and a single Krupp gun under De Wet himself, to strike Roodewal station and the treasure stacked beside it. But for once, his information is wrong. He has been told the station is lightly held. In fact, the British have rushed up a raw militia battalion, and at the station a scratch garrison of post office clerks, railway pioneers, and volunteers. They are not frontline soldiers, and they have no guns. When his demand to surrender reaches them, they write 4 words on the back of his own note and send it back: we refuse to surrender. Then they build breastworks out of what they have: bales of clothing, sacks of mail, stacked tins of bully beef, and they fight from behind those post bags for hours. The record usually forgets them. It should not. The fighting shows you his nerve again. His men are pinned on a plain so flat that there's barely cover for a horse's hoof, and one of his guns is drawing fire. So he gives an order that is pure De Wet: limber the gun, gallop it 3,000 paces back across open ground through a hail of bullets, then unlimber and fire again. His gunner does exactly that, and by what De Wet himself calls something close to a miracle, not a man or a horse is hit. Then Vroneman, having forced his own garrison to give up, brings his guns across and fires on a wall of mailbags. By noon, the white flag goes up over the bully beef tins. 200 prisoners at the station for 27 British killed and wounded, which tells you how good a breastwork of cotton and letters can be. Across all 3 raids of that morning, the count runs to several hundred more, and his own losses he calls negligible. Then he turns to the stores, and it stops being a battle and becomes the thing the legend is made of. There's too much to carry, hundreds of cases of goods, boots and blankets he would have killed for in the coming winter, and ammunition, including the great shells for the naval guns the British had hauled up to bombard Pretoria with. Shells meant to break the enemy capital, captured days after that capital had already fallen, sitting in a heap in De Wet's home district. He takes what he can. 600 cases of rifle ammunition he buries in a sandy riverbank near his own farm. The rest, 750,000 pounds worth of supplies, an almost unimaginable sum in 1900, he sets alight. He cannot take it, so he will not leave it. The mail, he tells the surrendering officers, can go only to one address, a bonfire. And then the morning dissolves into a farce, and he plainly loved every minute, because he lets it run for pages. He gives the burghers leave to raid the 2,000 mailbags first, and within minutes, every man in the commando has turned into what he calls a most zealous postmaster, tearing into parcels meant for British soldiers and helping himself to cigars and stockings and underclothes. Then the captured Tommies ask whether they might join in, and De Wet, delighted, tells them to help themselves. It is all for the fire anyway. And so you get British soldiers cheerfully looting their own army's mail, growing so spoilt for choice that they throw aside whole plum puddings. When the commando finally rides off in the dark, every horse is loaded so high with loot that there's no room left to sit one. So the men walk, leading the animals by the bridle, a column of armed men on foot, behind pack horses groaning with stolen Christmas. That is the picture to hold, not the battle, the fire. A farmer standing in his own district, 2 days after his enemy called the war as good as over, burning 750,000 pounds of that enemy's supplies, including the shells meant to finish a capital already taken, and riding off into the night with the men too loaded to sit a horse. Remember the forest of hands at the drift, all those British arms thrown up into the cold dawn at the word. Hold it, because now the same gesture comes back in the same war, made by the same man's own countrymen, and this time it's a catastrophe. It is July, a few months on, and the ground has shifted. With both capitals in British hands, the full weight of the empire swings around to crush whatever Free State resistance is left. And a very large Boer force, thousands of men, has gathered in the northeastern corner of the Free State in a place called the Brandwater Basin. Picture the basin, because the geography is the trap. It's a bowl of good grazing ringed almost the whole way around by a chain of mountains De Wet calls the Roodewal, sweeping from the Caledon River on the border of Basutoland all the way around. A ring of mountains has only so many doors. There are 6 passes, 6 narrow necks where a wagon or a horse can get through, and between them, long stretches where the rock will not let even a man on foot across. A bowl ringed by mountains with 6 doors, when the enemy has the numbers and is already coming, is not a fortress. It's a sack. All the British general, Hunter, has to do is to get a hand over each of the 6 necks and pull the string shut. De Wet sees it the moment he rides in. He says so flatly in the memoir. that with everyone now penned behind the Roodewal, he could see that they would, in all likelihood, soon be wiped out. He does not dress it up. He looks at the bowl and the 6 doors and the gathering columns, and he does the arithmetic. And the arithmetic says whoever is still inside when the string pulls is finished. So while the men argue for making a stand in the mountains, digging in on the high ground and fighting out, De Wet argues hard for the opposite. Get out now, through the doors before they shut, split into columns, and break for open country. And on the 15th of July, that is exactly what he does. He takes his own division, 2,600 men, the guns, and President Steyn and the Free State government now riding under his protection, and he goes out through Slabbert's Neck into the open ahead of the closing hand. The plan is that the rest will follow over the next 2 days. He even drags along, cursing them the whole way, 400 wagons he cannot persuade his men to abandon. Whatever he did, he writes, it seemed he could not get rid of the wagons. There is the man again, threading a closing trap with the president and the artillery, and still grumbling about the luggage. He gets out, then he waits for the others to follow. But they do not, and it comes apart not from any British brilliance, but from Boer indiscipline, which De Wet never forgives. The moment he is gone, the officers left behind begin squabbling over command. They hold an illegal meeting, depose the general he had left in charge, and elect another man, Martinus Prinsloo, by a bare and disputed handful of votes. While they are running committee meetings about the chain of command, Hunter's columns break through at Slabbert's Neck and pour into the bowl. Now there is panic. The same assembly that just elected Prinsloo turns and votes 17-13 to surrender, then takes it back, then asks the British for a 6-day armistice to think it over. A 6-day armistice, with the enemy already through the gates. As De Wet asks witheringly, did they truly imagine the British would be foolish enough to hand their trapped enemy 6 free days to escape? Either the men in that room were remarkably short-sighted, he writes, or, and he lets the sentence hang, something worse. Hunter refuses, and on the 29th of July, Prinsloo surrenders the army on the mountains, unconditionally. The hands go up, thousands of them, the other way. How many is contested? De Wet, counting Prinsloo's surrender, says about 3,000. The British counted higher. As the surrenders ran on over the following days, the bag reached 4,314, 3 generals, half a dozen commandants. Either way, it is the single largest Boer surrender of the entire war. A quarter of the Free State's fighting strength walked into captivity inside one ring of mountains. And among the spoils Hunter recovered were 2 field guns the British had lost months earlier, Broadwood's guns, the ones De Wet had taken in the drift at Sanna's post. The war hands things back and forth like that. The guns seized at his great triumph were returned at his people's great disaster. He is angrier here than almost anywhere else in the book. He calls Prinsloo's surrender an act of murder, committed on the government, the country, and the nation. There's even a moment of bleak comedy in it. One of the deposed generals, Roodewal, a fighting parson, and by every account a brave and sincere man, was so wedded to the technicality of who truly held command that he rode in person into Hunter's camp to lodge a formal protest that the surrender was invalid, since he, not Prinsloo, was the rightful commander, as though an army could be unsurrendered on a point of order. The result, De Wet notes dryly, was that the British simply had one more prisoner. Hunter seemed to have rather liked the man even as he bagged him. The war was full of that. Men trying to kill each other and finding at the moment of capture that they did not mind the other fellow much at all. So the first time the great net really closes, really pulls tight, what does it take? 4,000 men, 3 generals, the guns, a quarter of an army. But not De Wet. He is already out the door, riding north into open country with the president and the artillery and his infuriating wagons, while behind him his countrymen put their hands in the air. That is the moment the real hunt begins, the one they will name after him, because the British look at the biggest haul of the war and understand that the one man they wanted above all of them has slipped the cordon again. Everything turns toward him now. Columns, cavalry, the whole apparatus pointed at a single rider going the wrong way up the map. After the basin, the hunt stops being a hunt and becomes an obsession with the budget. Roberts throws the whole machine at one man, and the numbers are absurd. 3 columns, 12,000 men under Kitchener and Methuen and Smith Dorrien, strung out behind De Wet, running him north across the Highveld. Then, sent racing across the country to slam the last door before he reaches it, Ian Hamilton with another 7,500. Call it 20,000 soldiers for one stocky farmer, one president, a few thousand tired burghers, and the wagons he still will not abandon. Roberts is so sure of it that he cables London he will be bitterly disappointed if De Wet and Steyn get away, and he writes to the Queen that the war in the Free State is, to all intents, finished. The man is already drafting the victory notes. Give the chase its due, because they very nearly pull it off. Methuen drives his mounted men 80 miles in 60 hours. The infantry behind him cover 66 miles in 76, half running across the veldt, every man understanding what is at stake. They catch his rearguard. A British shell smashes one of his guns and is left behind. It is a real, grinding, exhausting pursuit, and it is closing. Then he reaches the Magaliesberg, the long mountain wall west of Pretoria, and for once it looks as if the net will hold. There are only 3 ways through the range, 3 passes, and the British believe all 3 are blocked. He has marched 200 miles in a month only to arrive, as one historian puts it, in an even tighter trap than the one that swallowed Prinsloo in the Basin. Methuen, certain the other doors are shut, throws his men across one of them, the Magato Pass, to seal the gap. The fox is in the corner. This, at last, is the day they take him. Except for the door at Olifant's Neck. It was the main southwestern pass, and it was Hamilton's job. On the 11th of August, Hamilton was ordered by telegraph, in plain words, to go and block it, to put his 7,500 men across it and shut De Wet in. Here's the thing the British Army would argue about for years, and that no one in command would say aloud at the time. Hamilton knew exactly how much it mattered, and he did not go. He wired back that he would rather try catch the Boers in the open first, before they ever reached the pass. He took a detour. His men dawdled, making barely 30 miles in the 2 decisive days, while De Wet made 45. And so, on the 14th of August, when De Wet came through the poplars of the Magalies Valley to the great southwestern door of the mountains, the door the whole trap depended on, the door 20,000 men had been driving him towards, it was standing open. He rode through it, into safe country on the far side, where the commandos of another Boer general, Delaray, were waiting. The net closed on empty veldt again. The aftermath is the most human part of the whole hunt because of how the British handled a wound they had given themselves. Kitchener fired off a furious private telegram demanding to know how, after they had run De Wet into a corner and staked everything on that door being shut, it had been left open. And Roberts, who in his official dispatches was perfectly willing to name and shame failed generals, went conspicuously, completely silent about Hamilton, who was his favourite. Not a word. The man at Roberts's own elbow, Rawlinson, wrote the plain truth privately in his diary instead. They had ordered Hamilton to Olifant's Neck. He had not gone there. De Wet had escaped because of it, and it was now going to drag the war out for a long while yet. They were all, he wrote, pretty low about the whole business. The door was left open, De Wet walked through it, and the most powerful army on earth closed ranks around the question of whose hand should have been on the latch. Here's the part that snags on me. The British remember Olifant's Neck as the escape, the great one, the blunder they could not stop chewing over. And De Wet, in his own memoir, he barely mentions it. He crosses the Magaliesberg almost in passing, a line or two, no drama at all. To the man who escaped, the open gate was not the story. The story, the moment he himself thought all was finally lost, came a few days later, on the way back, on a different mountain, and it did not turn on any British general's failure. It turned on a man at a hut whose name nobody wrote down. What he does next tells you everything. He has just slipped a 20,000-man trap. The sensible move is to stay slipped, keep going, rest, disappear. Instead, once Steyn peels off to confer with the Transvaal government, De Wet hands the main column to another officer, takes barely 250 riders, and turns back toward the Free State. Partly to drag the whole hunt off the main body and onto himself, partly because the Free State was home. He makes himself the bait on purpose. The man cannot stop fighting. And it nearly finishes him. Riding south near a hill called Wallet's Kop, he walks into a box. There's a British camp on the north of him and another to the west, a force coming straight at him from the front, and behind him, the wall of the Magaliesberg, 2,000 feet of rock with no way over. He is in open veld with almost no cover. His horses are spent, and he knows the enemy's mounts may be fresh from Pretoria. He puts it plainly. This was one of those moments when a man keeps his head or everything is lost. 4 fires and one stocky farmer in the middle of them with 250 exhausted men. So he does the only thing left. He rides up to a hut, the home of a black man whose name the record does not keep, and he points at the mountain wall and asks him straight whether a man can get across there. No, the man tells him, you cannot. Has anyone ever crossed here? De Wet asks. Once, the man says, long ago. And then De Wet asks him the question the whole legend turns on. Do baboons cross there? Yes, the man says. Baboons cross, but not a man. Then De Wet turns to his burghers and tells them that where a baboon can cross, they can cross. Then they climb it. And it is genuinely terrible. They go up a ravine out of sight at first, then have to turn out into the open, in full view of the British camps below, out of rifle range, but well inside the reach of the big guns. And De Wet privately suspects the columns chasing him have exactly the kind of gun that could reach. The slope gets so steep that there's no riding it. The men lead the horses and slip and fall backwards under them. Near the top there is one huge slab of granite as slick as ice, where man and horse go down together over and over. The burghers are muttering about what becomes of them if the guns open up here, because there's no road out of this. and the British, watching 20,000 strong from the flat ground below, with the guns in range and the most wanted man in the war pinned against a rock face in plain sight, do nothing. They do not fire, they do not follow. Whether from exhaustion or from plain disbelief that anyone would go up there at all, the record does not say. The fox goes up the cliff, and the hounds simply watch him go. They reach the top wrecked. He has climbed many mountains, he says, the rough cliffs of Majuba and the steep sides of Nicholson's Neck, but never in his life has he been as tired as he was at the top of that nameless track. Then he looks south, and the whole rolling veldt opens up below him for miles, and there is not a single enemy anywhere in it. He is through again. Come back to the question I set out at the start, the real one under the chase. What is a man worth who cannot be beaten in a war that is already being lost? Look at what you've just watched. Sanna's post, where 350 men in a ditch gutted a column. Roodewal, where he burnt £750,000 of the enemy's supplies in his own backyard. The Brandwater Basin, where the net finally closed and took 4,000 men and not him. Olifant's Neck, where 20,000 soldiers and an open door could not hold him. A baboon track, where 4 fires could not hold him either. The pattern never breaks. Every time the Empire draws the net tight, it finds the same thing inside, open veldt and a thin trail of hooves heading the wrong way. They keep at this for 2 more years, and I will tell you now so you are not waiting for it. They never catch him. The British never, ever catch Christiaan de Wet. He is finally taken, a decade and a half later, not by any Englishman, but by the last person you would expect. But that is for next time. Here's the line I keep returning to. At the top of that mountain, in the middle of his triumph, de Wet drops one quiet sentence almost without noticing. The English, he says, had not yet begun to burn everything they came across. They had not yet begun that policy of destruction. Not yet. Because that is the war actually coming, the one no baboon track saves anyone from. While de Wet makes himself uncatchable, the Empire is about to stop chasing the man and start punishing the country that hides him. The farms, the livestock, the women and children, the people who cannot ride up a cliff to get away. The thing that finally beats the Boers is not a better trap. It is a decision to take the war out of his reach by making the country itself unlivable. And his refusal to lose, that beautiful, bottomless inability to concede, is exactly what keeps that war going long enough for the bill to come due. So here's the picture I promised at the start, and it is not de Wet on the summit with the whole Free State opening clean and empty beneath him. It is the other man, the one at the foot of the cliff, the man at the hut who knew which rock the baboons used and told de Wet the truth about it. De Wet asked the question, took the answer, and climbed up out of the trap and away. The man stayed. He lived at the bottom of that mountain. He had no fresh horse to gallop, no cliff to vanish over, no memoir to write. When the burning came, the farms, the cattle, the camps, it came for people exactly like him, the ones the net was never aimed at, and it never had to be, because they could not move at all. We do not know his name. We do not know what the war did to him, or to whoever else was in that hut. The record kept de Wet and lost the man who showed him the way out. That is the gap. And I've come to think the gap is not a hole in the story, it is the story. A man who could not lose, riding up and over, free, and below him, holding the one answer he needed, all the people who could not lose either, because they were never allowed to play, only to pay. So that is where I'll leave you, on a mountain at dusk with 2 men, one of them riding away into legend, and one of them standing at the bottom, watching him go, with a name nobody wrote down. Next time, the Cape Colony.